Hello, everyone, and welcome to the real estate market analysis for Morgan Hill, California for May of 2023. As we always do, we get together at the end of the month and we talk about the numbers so that we can understand where we were, where we are today, and where we might be going in the market for the rest of 2023. So sit down, relax. We're going to go ahead and jump in and take a look at the numbers. But before we do, introduce myself. My name's Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker and realtor right here in Santa Clara County, ready to help you with any of your buying or selling needs that you might have. You can find me over at soldbyrobert.com, where I've got some great tools for both buyers and sellers to take advantage of, including my new HomeBot AI tool that will not only give you that monthly estimate of your home's value that everybody puts out there and tries to offer folks, but it's going to give you a ton of other tools that are great for figuring out how much equity you have in your home, whether or not you should refinance, give you some what if calculators for what would happen if I was to rent my home for short terms. Perhaps you're going on vacation, you want to rent it for a short period of time, analyzing different ways you can tap into your equity. It's a great tool. Even if you never plan to sell your home, the information it gives you is amazing for figuring out what your current standing is with your property relating to how to manage your mortgage, how to potentially change up your situation with equity or your mortgage payments. Feel free to check it out. And if you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. No commitment, offered to you completely free. Just head on over to soldbyrobert.com. Now let's go ahead and jump in and take a look. We're going to start, as we always do, with the total number of active listings. And just to calibrate you to what that number represents, for you buyers, it's the total number of homes you had to choose from out there in the marketplace in the month of May. And for you sellers, this is your competition. This is the total number of homes that were available for sale in Morgan Hill, and not even divided by anything related to, bedrooms, baths, any of that stuff. It's just the total number of homes that were single family residential, townhome, or condo that are out there in Morgan Hill. Now, as you can see, we had a pretty dramatic decline from the same time last year. If you take a look at the chart all the way over to the right, the bright red column is May of 2022, and right next to it is May of 2023. So you can, right next to each other, see visually what that difference is. And there's actually a 29% decline from the same time last year. So 83 homes on the market last year, 59 this year. And you can see inventory has been relatively flat. Now, we've seen this in the other communities that I do market reports on, but things have been relatively flat really since January. We saw a bit of an uptick in January, which is normal when we start the new year. But then we had a bit of a drop off in February, which is less common. So that was a little bit interesting to see. We usually see an uptick in February. Didn't see that this year. But as we move through the rest of this, in terms of changes, what can we likely expect in the coming months? And let's try to use last year as a indicator. In May, and the one thing to keep in mind is take a look at what happened between March, April, and May of last year. The dramatic increases in inventory as we headed to May, with a peak in June. But not seeing that this year. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that one reason why we saw such dramatic increases in overall inventory is because homes weren't selling as fast after March. Remember, interest rates went up dramatically in March, and that had a huge impact on the number of homes that sold in the months following. So that's why one of the reasons we saw such a dramatic increase. But if we look at May of last year, we would normally expect this number to increase using last year as a model. I don't think that's what we're going to see. I think we will see perhaps on par with this month, but I think in terms of total active listings, it'll be relatively flat. Basically a continuation of what we've been seeing for the first few months of 2023. Now, one other thing to keep in mind here is the total months of inventory. That's what the 1.2 represents. And just to calibrate you to what is considered the normal number for that, 5.5 to 6.5 months of inventory is considered normal nationally. Here in the local market of Santa Clara County, normally 4.5 to 5.5 is what I would consider a balanced market. And when you have this low months of inventory, you would normally think that this is very much a strong seller's market. But because there are so few buyers out there, that is not the case. However, it is a clear indicator that if something were to change dramatically in buyer demand, if we suddenly saw a big drop in interest rates, we would be right into a insane seller's market based on just how low the inventory is right now. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at new listings. These are homes that were put onto the market in May of 2023. So homeowners that decided to list their home, this is the total number that did it. Last year, we had 85 homes added to the market in Morgan Hill. This year we had 65 in May of 2023. That's a 24% decline. And the trend we're seeing from December to May, relatively normal. It's in terms of the relationship from month to month. It's normal to see a big jump from December to January and from January to February. If we look at last year, February, March, April, May, we can see that things ramped up to April, where they peaked in April and then declined a little bit in May. Didn't see the same thing this year. We saw the sort of the increase, the biggest increase happen this May compared to the previous months. If we look at past months to try to see where we might be going from here in terms of new listings or sellers that decide to go, homeowners that decide to become sellers, given the numbers we saw last year in June and July, my guess is we've more or less hit the peak. It'll probably be flat in June and it'll decline after June. Once we've gotten through June, if we use last year as a model, we would expect a steady decline in total number of homes being added to the market right up to December of 2023, if it mirrors what we saw last year. Total number of homes sold. These are how many homes actually sold, meaning escrow closed. So one thing to calibrate your head to is this data is about a month old, meaning that the offer that was accepted a month before this happened. So this is typically homes who made an offer on a home in April and it closed in May. It could even be late March when that offer was accepted. So just keep that in mind, since this is a 1 month lagging indicator of the actual activity of making an agreement on a contract for a home. Now, it's down 20% from the same time last year. Last year in May of 2022, we saw 64 homes sold, 51 homes sold in May of 2023, which was a really big jump from April. I mean, look at that trend. We saw January, February, March, April, and then that big jump. Last year in May, we peaked in April, and May was the first month of decline after hitting the peak. But we saw that we declined once we hit that peak in April for pretty much the rest of the year until we hit January, where it bottomed out. And remember, that January number would be more reflective of homes that actually had an agreed upon sales agreement in December of 2022. So where do we go from here? I think it's downhill from here, which is actually a little bit depressing because it tends to indicate we're not going to see a big increase in the inventory. Because as I said, we're in that time of the market when we tend to hit the peak. And in terms of homes being added to the market, homes being sold, this is typically the hot time. So April, May, this tends to be it. This tends to be the peak. So it's likely going to be all downhill from here, where we just see continuing lowering numbers of homes that get sold month to month. Homes pending. This is a number I've started to track because I want to get a feeling for where things are going to be going. And as I mentioned, home sales are a lagging indicator of transactions that actually got started the month before. This tells us what homes are actually in the process of getting sold. In other words, they haven't sold yet. They haven't closed escrow. No one's gotten their money. The bank hasn't funded the loan, but sellers have accepted an offer from a buyer, and that's what this represents. And we've had a pretty decent increase from April to May. And it's on par with last year. We had 55 this year, 56 last year. So in terms of the sample size of Morgan Hill, that is basically the same number. It's down 2%, but because, again, the sample size is so low, I'd consider that a wash. So that's actually not bad in terms of activity numbers. Although, remember, May of last year was after the drop in drop in buyers as a result of the increase in interest rates. So sort of a similar metric was in play in terms of what was influencing buyers' decisions to make those purchases. But again, take a look at where things were in April and May of last year. In March, we saw the peak last year. In April, we saw a pretty big drop between March and April. But things really declined once we got out of April and May all the way until January. My guess is we're going to see the same thing. We will see so this number tells us we're likely to see on par or increased sales of homes next month, more homes sold next month. But it also tends to indicate, because of past performance, that this is the peak. This is it. We're likely going to see this going down from here. So in terms of activity for the rest of 2023, we've likely already seen the peak of this number. Average original list price. Now, I like to report original list price because that's the number that was on the listing agreement at the time the seller signed the contract to list their home for sale. So this is the number that was entered into the MLS the day it went on the market. So this tells us the expectations. This is a little bit of a peek inside the mindset of sellers to get an idea of what were their expectations. What were they thinking that their home could get? And it was down 6.4% from the same time last year. Now, that's a good thing because historically, Morgan Hill has had a bit of a disconnect between expectations and reality. So sellers have been coming onto the market with, in some cases, the idea that their home will sell for 10, 15% over what it sold for the previous year. And that was forcing Morgan Hill to deal with a lot of homes staying on the market longer, but also price reductions and having to accept prices below asking price. This year, we saw last year's number was $1,753,000 was the original list price. This year, $1,640,000, so almost a $100,000 drop. And I think that that is a reasonable expectation, and we'll see what happens with sold numbers here in a minute. But as we can see, if we look back on this, this is very difficult to, because Morgan Hill is such a diverse market, with homes represented at almost every price point. And because of the low sample size, where we only have dozens rather than hundreds or thousands of homes that potentially get listed each month, this can be a much more fluctuating number. It just takes one $3 million home for, say, in May of 2022 to throw off the number and make that average list price jump up. But in this case, the trend has been up in the beginning of the year, which I think is an expectation that is normal. Simply because we're in that type of time of the market when if they're going to get your home sold, this is the best time to do it. While there are very low numbers of buyers, it's likely to be the highest number of buyers in 2023 that'll be out there in the market. So this is when this kind of thing is likely to happen and when folks are most optimistic about potentially getting their price. So I think that the idea that the average sales price is a little up is also normal. But I think also we saw some increased activity as folks from higher priced markets up north came down to Morgan Hill and adjusted their location rather than adjusting the price they wanted to pay for a home. They wanted to get the same quality home, but without seeing crazy payments because of interest rates. All right, next, let's go ahead and take a look at average sales prices. We can see that it was down 14.3%. So despite the fact that sellers were more calibrated in terms of what they were listing their homes for, we still saw a pretty dramatic drop. Now, last year, $1,497,000 was the average sales price. In May of 2023, that number was $1,284,000. We can see numbers have been relatively flat for what gets sold, which indicates to us a couple of things. One, we know that homes have been listing at much higher points, but they're not selling as dramatically or as consistently because buyer attention is on these lower priced homes. So we see things running right around 1.3 million really since November, going all the way to May. It's sort of danced around a little bit and stayed just below 1.3 with one jump over 1.3 in April. But that's been where the activity has been. And it's also important to keep track of where that reality is. Where is the most activity? It's something I call price banding. Morgan Hill is one of those communities where it happens quite a bit, where it can take substantially longer in different price bands to get your home sold. And what's really interesting about that is sometimes it'll skip. Sometimes you'll find, which is, I realize, statistically an odd thing to wrap your head around, but sometimes let's use an example and say homes priced from 1.3 million to 1.7 million will sell less quickly than homes priced from 1.7 to 2.2. I know that sounds odd. It frequently happens in different markets. It's usually not that way, but sometimes that plays a part in these markets. So it's something to keep track of if you're a buyer out there and having a conversation with your real estate professional to say, hey, where are the price bands? Where do the highest levels of activity tend to be happening in terms of price point? The reason why I point that out is for my folks out there who are interested in selling or who are actively trying to get your home sold now. If you're just $100, $200, $300, or $1,000 away from another price band where more activity is happening, it could be very much worth it to you to move the price of your home to get into that price band. And it can work both ways. If you're at the bottom of a price band where the price band below you is a ton more active, then you might want to lower your price. If you're in a price band where the price band above you is showing more activity, you may want to raise your price. Doesn't always happen, but it's something to be aware of. It doesn't make any sense to simply not check on that to see where you are competitively as it relates to the pricing of your property. All right. Next, percent of list price. 100% indicates that folks on average are getting their list price. Right now in Morgan Hill, we're seeing right about that, 100.1, which shows that on average, some folks are getting over asking price to the tune of 0.1%. Last year, that number was 106.1. So folks on average were getting 6.1% over asking price. And this is basically ironing out pretty much the way I indicated it would in the last 2 months of market analysis that we did, where I was saying that in April, maybe a little bit into May, we'll see an extension of getting over 100% of asking price, but this was the peak and we're going to decline from here. And this is exactly what we're seeing. Now it's down overall 6% from the same time last year. If we look at last year, we can see that March was the peak and then April was also very high, 111 in both cases, 0.8 in March, 0.3 in April. And then after that, a steady decline in May, June, and July. And we're seeing that same trend here as well. So my guess is for the rest of this year, we're going to see this number go down. It would not surprise me at all if in June we see below 100%. Given the dramatic drop from April to May, I'm going to make the call that I think we're going to probably see below 100% average percent of list price. So be ready for that. There's gonna be a situation here where, because of this reality, a couple of things are going to happen. One, more price reductions on the part of sellers who are trying to get their homes sold before we get further into 2023. And this will really separate those sellers into the groups of folks who got to get sold this year versus the folks who really didn't need to get sold and have the option to go off market and say, well, I'm not willing to go down anymore, and I'll just simply wait for a recovery of some kind. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the coming months. And July will be, I think, very interesting for the market in Morgan Hill. Total days on market, we can see that we are at 23 days in May of 2023. That's up 117% from the same time last year when it was 12 days to get a home sold. If we look at last year, we can see that after May, the number started to go up. Also keep in mind, though, that that was also the very first instance of, not very first, but that was the first May after the March where interest rates went up. So you would likely expect days on market to increase, but that dynamic is still in play. So my guess is, now we hit our peak of days on market in February of 2023 at 53. As the market started to heat up and we sold off a whole lot of homes that had been on the market for a very long time, was the reason why we saw such a dramatic days on market number. Because remember, this is the number of homes that sold and what number of days they'd been on the market when they did sell. So then we saw a dramatic drop as homes that came on the market in February, because remember, we also saw good numbers relating to new homes being added to the market in February and March. Then we started to see this drop as those homes that came onto the market that were the best examples of those kinds of homes in the marketplace sold quickly in less than, say, 30 days. And we saw that steady drop, 23 days this month. My guess is that we will start to see this number increase. We will see, because we had such a robust pending number this month, my guess is we probably won't see that in June, but my guess is in July is when we'll start to see the days on market start to head back up. Now, I wanted to go ahead and hit finally the price reductions. This is the total number of homes on the market that have had their price reduced. Last month, it was 10.3. This month, 27.5. So a giant increase. And I think that this is definitely a reflection of what we've talked about, where in the past, Morgan Hill was not super calibrated in terms of its list prices as to what the market would support. And given what we've seen in terms of dropped average sales price, I think you can see where I'm going with this. Lots of homes needed to drop their price. We've seen this fluctuate a bit in Morgan Hill. Morgan Hill has had more challenges than other communities in terms of pricing right out of the gate. But this number of 27.5 shows that an awful lot of homes, well over a quarter of homes, have made that jump and decided to lower their list price. Where do I think this is going to go? My guess is we will potentially, the homes being listed recently have shown more rational pricing, but we're still seeing that difference between list price and average sales price. My guess is this number will still stay relatively high. Wouldn't surprise me if it goes down a little bit in June, but still stays well above the 10.3 that we saw last month. Okay. I think that about covers it, folks. As always, the goal is to leave you with more knowledge on the table than we take up in your time. Of course, if you'd like to get the most knowledge, head on over to soldbyrobert.com and take advantage of the great tools I offer buyers and sellers to get the very best information, not only on your home, if you're considering just trying to figure out what your standing is with your mortgage and your equity, or if you're a buyer who's trying to just have the best tools available to facilitate your search for a home. You can find both of those right there for you on the front page of soldbyrobert.com. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.